For centuries, the Roman Empire was synonymous with absolute power. Its standard waved from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, from the Sahara Desert to the plains of northern Europe. They ruled millions, built eternal roads, colossal cities, and an army feared across the known world. And yet, there was one land they never managed to subdue. A wild region, covered in thorny forests and raging rivers. A land without cities, without empires, without a single king. Only tribes. Barbarians. Men who lived in freedom, armed with spears and fury, refusing to kneel before Rome. That land was called Germania. And for the Romans, it became an open wound that never healed. This is the story of how the most powerful empire of antiquity failed against peoples who didn't even have a nation. And why that failure changed the course of European history forever. For the Romans, almost everything had a name, a shape, a boundary. But Germania was different. It was not a country, nor a kingdom, nor a province. It was a vast territory of forests, swamps, and mountains stretching beyond the Rhine River, into the wild heart of the European continent. There was no central government. No capital. Only dozens of scattered tribes, each with its own leader, its own laws, its own gods. Some were nomadic. Others, settled. All independent. And all deeply suspicious of any external power. It was the Romans who, unable to comprehend such fragmentation, decided to give them a single name, Germania. Julius Caesar wrote it during his campaigns in Gaul. Not because the peoples of that region called themselves that, but because, for the Romans, it was easier to face a threat once it had a common name. But Germania was anything but common. It was a land that defied Roman logic. A region without roads, without columns, without forums or marble temples. And yet, full of pride, memory, and resistance. Rome was order. It was hierarchy, written laws, structures of power built upon marble and steel. In the empire, every citizen had an assigned place. The emperor at the top, followed by senators, magistrates, merchants, soldiers, slaves. A perfectly geared machine to conquer and rule. Germania, on the other hand, was the opposite. There was no senate, no emperor. The Germanic tribes lived off the land, the forest, and combat. They followed not written laws, but oral traditions passed down through generations. Each tribe chose its leaders in free assemblies. In times of war, they appointed temporary chiefs who led by merit, not by bloodline. While Rome built straight roads, the Germans moved along hidden paths. Where the Romans erected baths and theaters, the Germans worshipped trees, lakes, and mountains. Their religion spoke of Odin, Thor, and ancient spirits dwelling in the mist and thunder. To the Romans, these were superstitions. To the Germans, it was their very essence. They were two ways of seeing the world that could not mix. One sought control. The other, freedom. And that clash was inevitable. Rome did not tolerate empty spaces on its map. And for Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, Germania was a stain that had to be erased. Not for gold or glory, but for strategy. Because beyond the Rhine lived tribes that crossed the frontier, plundered villas, and vanished into the forests. Thus began an ambitious campaign, to turn Germania into just another Roman province. Tribe by tribe, the legions advanced. Some were defeated in battle. Others surrendered without fighting, seduced by the promises of Roman order, roads, trade, stability. It seemed Augustus's dream was about to come true. Germania would be tamed. To consolidate that progress, a governor was sent, Publius Quinctilius Varus. He was not a general, but an experienced politician. Rome no longer thought it needed an army there, only an administrator to bring taxes, censuses, and laws. But it was a mistake. Varus arrived in Germania acting like an emperor. He imposed taxes, dictated laws without listening, and treated tribal chiefs as ignorant vassals. He failed to understand that many of those peoples had not been conquered by blood, but by trust. A trust he broke. And amid the discontent, one figure silently emerged. One of their own. A man who spoke Latin, who knew Roman discipline and the weaknesses of its army. His name was Arminius. And he would change Rome's destiny forever. Year 9 AD. 3 Roman legions, led by Governor Verus, march deep into Germania. They believe they are going to suppress a minor revolt. What they do not know is that they are marching straight into a trap. Arminius, the young Germanic leader whom Rome had raised as one of its own, had feigned loyalty for years. But now, he had secretly united several tribes. And he had chosen the perfect place to strike, the Teutoburg Forest. As the Roman soldiers advanced along narrow paths, under constant rain and mud up to their ankles, the Germans lay hidden among the trees. There was no battle formation possible. No space to maneuver. Only an endless column of men trapped between the fog, the cold, and the silence of the forest. Then, the attack. Thousands of Germanic warriors strike from both flanks. The surprise is total. Chaos engulfs the Roman column. There are no orders, no strategy, only desperation. Verus tries to rally his men, but it is useless. The legions are cut down, one after another. In 3 days of slaughter, the Roman army is annihilated. Verus, cornered, takes his own life. The defeat is not only military. It is symbolic. For the first time, Rome suffers a humiliation of such magnitude within a territory it already believed was its own. And from that moment on, everything changes. Rome was not accustomed to losing. And even less to losing like this. The news of the massacre at Teutoburg was an earthquake that shook the very foundations of the empire. 3 legions, more than 15,000 men, vanished in the mist of a distant forest. There were no prisoners. No ransom. Only corpses, Germanic spears, and silence. Emperor Augustus, the man who had transformed the Republic into an empire, was devastated. Historians recount that, night after night, he would cry out with a broken voice. Verus, give me back my legions. But there were no legions to return. The disaster in Germania was not just military. It was psychological. For the first time, Rome felt fear. Fear of the untamable. Fear of an enemy that could not be absorbed, that could not be tamed with coins, aqueducts, or promises of citizenship. The consequences were profound. Rome abandoned its dream of conquering Germania. Not because it lacked the strength, but because it understood that some peoples would rather burn with honor than live under foreign laws. A new frontier was drawn. Not merely a geographic border, but an invisible wall between 2 ways of understanding the world. To the west of the Rhine, civilization, order, the authority of Caesar. To the east, wild forests, tribal freedom, the rebel spirit. From then on, every emperor who looked toward Germania did so with respect, and with caution. Because in that forest, Rome did not just lose men. It lost its illusion of invincibility. The echo of Teutoburg did not fade with time. On the contrary, it became a symbol. An eternal reminder that even the greatest power can fail when it underestimates the will of a people. For centuries, Germania remained a land of tribes. There was no unity, no empire, no common flag. But there was a shared memory, the night they defeated Rome. The time when free men overcame the most feared war machine of the ancient world. And that memory survived. Generation after generation. While Rome continued its story, with its glories, its crises, its decline, the forests of Germania preserved a culture that was rebellious, untamed, capable of resisting centuries of assimilation. Paradoxically, Rome never again attempted to conquer Germania. But Germania did conquer Rome, centuries later, when those same barbarian peoples who once resisted crossed the weakened frontiers of the empire and brought it down from within. Among them were the descendants of Arminius. History is ironic. Rome lost a battle and believed it was retreating with dignity. But in that retreat, it left behind a seed. A seed of resistance that, centuries later, would grow into an unstoppable wave. It was not an immediate victory. It was a delayed revenge. The legacy of Teutoburg is not only military. It is human. It reminds us that power without wisdom becomes arrogance. And that freedom, when defended with the soul, can withstand even the mightiest empire of its time. The story of Germania is not only about a lost battle. It is about the invisible limit that even the most powerful empires cannot cross, the soul of a people determined not to surrender. For swords and conquests are not enough. Laws and cities are not enough. If a people do not give up their spirit, they can never truly be ruled. And the Germans never surrendered it. While Rome carved its legacy in stone, the forests of Germania wrote theirs in blood, in silence, in freedom. Today, thousands of years later, the memory of that resistance still lives on. In every corner of the world where someone refuses to bow to injustice. Where someone fights for dignity, for identity, for the right to live unchained. Germania taught us that history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes, it is written by those who refuse to be defeated.